Hello, and welcome to our Syxsense August Patch Tuesday webinar. Today, we have industry expert Rob Brown to give us an inside look at the newest Patch Tuesday release. If you have any questions, please add those to the chat, and Rob will reach out after to answer them. With that, I'll pass it over to Rob.
Thank you very much, and a very warm welcome to everyone joining us today. It's August. We are now in the second half of the year. It's flying by. We certainly have a lot to talk about today. One of the things we're going to cover first is the Windows lifecycle. Now, the Windows and feature updates, they are creeping up fast. So if you are already on the latest version of Windows 10 and 11 feature updates, that's fantastic. You do need to be aware, though, that Windows 10 Enterprise will officially go end of life next year in 2025 in October. That means you must move away from Windows 10 to Windows 11 in order to stay compliant. Windows 11 22H2 actually goes end of life this year, so you do need to very quickly migrate to 23H2, which gives you a couple of more years support. Very, very important. Feature updates and patching go hand in hand together. So once you're on the latest feature update, you can continue to patch. Once your feature update lapses, you're actually no longer able to patch that operating system because the Microsoft won't actually release updates for it. So it's super important. If you're having a hard time or a difficult time in a highly distributed environment, rolling out those feature updates, please do let us know. We've created some playbooks that will actually help you to get to whichever Windows 10 or Windows 11 feature update you want to get to, even if the user is at home or on a distributed link, or in fact in another country. So it's just a quick email to us and we'll be able to send across everything you need to get upgraded. Adobe did release a couple of updates, very strange one actually. This is the first one for a long time for Adobe Acrobat and Reader. The reason I say it's strange is because they announced during this bulletin, which is APSB 24-57, this was released yesterday at the same time as Microsoft Patch Tuesday, that there was an active attack, that this was exploited somewhere, or what we call weaponized. However, they've called it a priority 3. A priority 3, according to the rollout schedule from Adobe, is deployed at some point in the month. It's not urgent, it's not immediate, it's not in the week, it's within the month. So I'm a little bit interested to hear that. However, for third-party updates, especially if you're still using Acrobat and Reader, I know there's a lot of other PDF tools available, but do include those third-party updates in your rollout. It's very, very important that you are deploying them, keeping those third parties up to date. And not just Adobe, but there's a whole host of other third-party applications. We do have a very specific webinar covering the third-party software that it should be a priority. That's a different webinar to this one. But I do like to highlight these, especially if they're released through Caesar or through the vendor where they are issuing a weaponization alert. Now, we did have another large Patch Tuesday release. In fact, for the last couple of months, and I'm not going to mention what happened just several weeks ago about another type of update, but I was hoping that as we get towards the Christmas period, that we'd start to see what we saw last year, which is kind of a tailing off of the number of vulnerabilities, especially considering the feature updates are becoming end of life. But that is not the case. We've had another release of a very, very large host of fixes. 7 of those were critical, 79 were important, 1 moderate. In fact, we had more fixes last month, but we had more weaponization this month. So 11 are more likely to be weaponized. 6 are already documented as being weaponized. Very, very serious. 4 are public aware and 6 are jump point. Now we're going to cover weaponization in a second, but jump points are a very special category of vulnerability. If you're familiar with the CVSS score, part of the calculator that is used is whether or not it has a scope. So the technical term is a scope, but I like to call it a jump point. What a scope means, or a jump point, is that through the original vulnerability that you exploit, you can jump into another technology outside of the original exploitation. So to give you an example, if you were to exploit the Microsoft Edge browser vulnerability that is fixed in this release, you're able to jump from Microsoft Edge into another technology such as Windows or PowerShell or Windows services. You can actually jump out of it. And that is very, very serious when you do have one of those jump points, because that allows somebody to come in through one particular mechanism, jump into Windows and start exploiting elsewhere. Very, very serious. So please, if you're building a strategy and you need assistance, do get in contact with us. I'll show you the website in a second. These are the kind of elements we like to build into a strategy. We don't just want to use just severity. There are many other ways of categorizing these vulnerabilities so that you prioritize the ones most important to you, especially considering the immediate deployment is probably not the best methodology to follow. But we have some suggestions and recommendations on that. Now we have a new winner, bug types. So we had from this massive list of bug types fixed yesterday, we have a new winner. Elevation of privilege, we now have 36. This has been at second place for the last 3 or 4 months. Elevation of privilege, that's where a threat actor gains access to an employee's account, bypasses the proper authorization channel, and successfully grants themselves access to data they're not supposed to have. The most serious kind of vulnerability is remote code execution. That's a class of cyber attack in which attackers remotely execute commands to place malware or malicious code on your computer or network. That's the one that most likely is being used in an active attack through the virus or through the malware category. There were 28 fixes in this, and this may be an additional selection criteria for what you are prioritizing when you are deploying your updates. Of the list, remote code execution is the most serious, and that may be something you want to very specifically select when you're rolling out your updates. Information disclosure vulnerability, that's when a program unintentionally reveals sensitive information. Spoofing vulnerability, 7 of those. That's the act of disguising a communication or identity. Denial of service is simply an attack meant to shut down the device, making it inaccessible. Not really to steal anything, but just to cause you some disruption to your user base. Security feature bypass, that's when an attacker bypasses the authentication mechanisms of a device to gain unauthorized access. And one I've not seen before called tampering. There was just one of those vulnerabilities which were tampering, and I will find out what that means for the next webinar. I imagine it's got something to do with a security breach or some sort of method of invoking a security breach, but I'm not 100% sure of that. Now, let's talk about a very serious issue. About 30 years ago, Microsoft used to release their service packs on CD. If anyone can remember that, you try not to name names, but I'm using an analogy that is very close to what I believe to be similar to what just happened a couple of weeks ago. Microsoft released Service Pack 5, if anyone remembers that, for Windows NT. They released this update, and upon install of this update, it started blue screening machines. And I remember when I was in IT to start with, in my earliest career, I was the guy that went around and installed the CD in all of the PCs to update them. And of course, as I went from PC to PC, they started to blue screen. From then, probably is where we started learning about phase rollouts and testing. And what we've done at Syxsense is to build a strategy around a phased rollout, allowing you sufficient time to test and to get confidence in what you're rolling out so that the wider impact of an issue isn't felt across your user base. And as part of the onboarding of Syxsense, when we're teaching you an effective strategy that takes into consideration both speed, agility, and confidence, we kind of use this method. So what we're going to be recommending today is a very, very simple phased rollout strategy. Very, very quick. To start with, you want to use a sandbox. So your pilot systems where you want to test updates that I'm recommending today, it should be done in a sandbox environment. What does that mean? It means a PC that isn't your IT system. It's a PC, maybe a test device, a laptop, a desktop. It could be a virtual device, but it shouldn't be something that if there was an issue, stops you from changing the patching strategy that's going to be used for the wider rollout of those updates. That is why I recommend the sandbox first, because if that gets broken or interrupted as part of an update, it's not the PC you're using to send emails and also to manage your strategy. That's why at phase 2, that's when you can deploy updates to your IT systems. Those are your devices, but you should have some confidence. You've seen the patch install inside the sandbox. It hasn't caused any issues, specifically blue screens, and you can now progress through that rollout from your IT to your extended pilots. And we're talking about days. We're not talking about weeks. We're saying that we can hit the sandbox on Wednesday, Thursday, we can hit the IT devices on Thursday, and we can hit the extended pilot on Friday. Extended pilots for us should be a representative of your environment, and it should be as distributed as possible to reflect the software that's used across devices over your organization. And a very good way of selecting an extended pilot, what we found with Syxsense, is to use the IP address. So if it's a laptop, if it's a desktop, and its IP address ends in 1, then on average, you'll probably find that's about 10% of your environment. Now, if you leave that running across the weekend, not deploy on Monday, and Tuesday comes around, that's when you can start rolling out your extended pilot, your test users, and then to your live environment, to your live users, potentially using IP address extensions. So using IP addresses 1 and 2, 3 and 4, 5 and 6, or even when we start deploying to the live environment, we can do odd IP addresses and even IP addresses. Now that can be done in a very quick way if you are able to automate. And it's very important with Syxsense. We try to build as much of this as an automation method as possible so that you can routinely roll out your updates, but not deploy everything at the same time, and certainly not without validation of the outcome of those updates. Very important. And the second thing, emails, communication, change management. What's being deployed, to which devices are being deployed, and for how long. That is where our reports can help to define what's being deployed, who the users are, and how long that is likely to take. And when you combine those two, you have a very good method of identifying issues before they hit the majority of your environment. And in that scenario I mentioned about the Windows NT4 Service Pack 5, if we had done testing in a sandbox, we wouldn't have deployed a single CD update to any systems at all. We would have caught it and we would have saved ourselves a lot of rolling back, especially considering that had to be manually fixed on every single system. So just a brief intro into how we'd like to build a strategy from Syxsense on how we roll it out, what updates we are including in that phase rollout. Let's take a look. We'd like to prioritize them in several ways. Lots of companies we work with when we are onboarding have a very specific agenda because they've used other patch management tools before and they may not have had a highly sophisticated selection criteria. With Syxsense, we have quite a few different selection criteria to help prioritize updates. Now, we have a lot of customers that can't deploy all of the updates at once. That's perfectly fine. We can put them into groups and we can deploy the most important first, followed by the second and third and fourth, etc. But prioritizing the updates is very important, and we use 6 factors to give us the initial list of updates that we want to roll out first. These are the most serious ones, starting with vendor severity. Now, vendor severity is from critical, high, or important, medium, low, and NA, from the very most serious to the least serious. And the vendor issues that severity. You'll notice today there's actually a few vulnerabilities that are highly rated in my list of priorities, but haven't got a vendor severity of critical. Very, very interesting. The CVSS score is an independent calculation out of 10 that ranks the vulnerability based on many, many factors. Of course, we just talked about the scope is one of those factors, but also complexity, user requirements, etc. All defines the score out of 10. 10 being the very most serious, 0 being the least serious. Now, if you combine those two together, you have a better understanding about the severity of a vulnerability, and that can help you choose the first deployments you do, which covers the highest rated vulnerabilities. Weaponized and public aware, these are states of a vulnerability. Now, weaponized vulnerability means that it's actively being used in an attack. And a lot of our antivirus partners are providing information to us about specific CVEs that are used in an active attack. Microsoft is very, very good at also letting their customers know as well. That's effectively known as under active exploit, but lots of different vendors call it different things. Some vendors even calling it 0-day, which really isn't a true definition. Weaponized is what we call it, which is a combination of all of those elements. So something is weaponized, it's used in an active attack. Now, public aware doesn't mean that the vulnerability is known. It means the exact steps to exploit is publicly aware somewhere. Could be on a website. Someone may have done a YouTube channel and is showing you how to exploit these vulnerabilities. Just because something is public aware doesn't mean it always becomes weaponized. In fact, it's probably about 10 to 1, where you have a public aware vulnerability that then becomes weaponized because of that information that's provided. In fact, there's no vulnerability this month that is both weaponized and public aware, I'm very pleased to say. Public aware doesn't, like I said, doesn't necessarily mean it will become weaponized, but that shouldn't mean you shouldn't include it. I certainly wouldn't want to be an IT manager that knew a vulnerability was public aware, not yet weaponized, so I didn't include it as a priority. It might be something that you want to think about. Now, to balance some things, we have countermeasures. Now, countermeasures are either mitigations or workarounds. Mitigations meaning you may not have it turned on, it may not be part of your ecosystem. It may have a next generation. You may have a next generation antivirus that's actually protecting you. And you also have workarounds. So maybe a group policy change that changes a registry key can effectively resolve the vulnerability. And those things can be deployed very, very fast, and maybe faster than rolling out a 1.5 gigabyte update. So we offer those countermeasures in our advice so that you can see from the vendor how to counter measure the vulnerability, and you can then roll out that registry key to solve the problem. And lastly, your exposure. So we are taking all of these considerations into your exposure. So if you have a really, really serious vulnerability that is a severity, it's weaponized, it's CVSS 10, it's super serious, and you only have it on 2 machines, but you have a non-weaponized vulnerability that's public aware with no countermeasure and maybe isn't critical, but has a very high CVSS score, but it's on 99% of your environment, then that CVE I would recommend you prioritize over the first one. Or if you can, deploy them both together, but certainly you want to be targeting the ones that pose the greatest risk across your exposure. Now, we're going to take a look at our Patch Tuesday list. We actually do publish that to our website every single Patch Tuesday. So if you head across to syxsense.com, you'll find over on the top there, we've got some products and features and some resources section. If you have any questions, as I mentioned, if you'd like some assistance on how to do patch testing, or you would like a patching strategy, or because what has just happened in the last 3 weeks, a lot of customers are asking us to reevaluate their selection criteria and their patching strategy. Just go ahead and use this chat function in the corner, and one of our technicians will be able to get back to you and provide you as much information as you need. And if we have any white papers or best practices, we'll send those across to you. Under our resources, we have our events, our white papers, etc., which you can use. You can find this really useful stuff. Within here, we've got our Patch Tuesday webinar links, and we actually publish that every single Tuesday. And if you subscribe to this page, you'll actually get an email straight away as soon as it's been uploaded. So every time we publish that, it will pop into your mailbox, and you won't have to remember to access our site every month. Oh, we have a GigaOM. So if you are familiar with GigaOM, they're very, very good at reviewing different tool sets. If you'd like to read our GigaOM report, just go click on that button there and download it. Now, as I mentioned, we had 6 weaponized threats. In fact, I don't remember this year if we've ever had as many as 6. It's very, very concerning. Now, these particular vulnerabilities also carry quite a high CVSS score as well. So we got vulnerabilities with a 9.8. If you remember CVSS out of 10, 10 being the most serious, there's a lot of vulnerabilities to talk about today. Now, we have fixes for Windows, Windows Components, Office, Azure, Visual Studio, a lot of Visual Studio, and Kernel. Lots of interesting updates on Kernel. If you've been watching the news recently, that may jog a memory why there's maybe a couple of updates around the kernel, but I would highly recommend that you still use our priorities to target the most serious ones. If you count all the CVSSs up, now considering this month we had way less than last month in terms of the number of fixes, the average CVSS is 7.7, which actually means that there are more vulnerabilities fixed in this release that are higher rated severity than last month. I thought that was really interesting. Now, my priorities for today for you is CVE 2024 2024 38189, which is a Microsoft project. I don't think I've ever talked about a Microsoft project being my priority. Now, this is very, very serious. It is a weaponized vulnerability, but it does require your users to fall victim to a breach. Now, I highlight this because there is a few other Microsoft vulnerabilities here which can be exploited through the preview pane. This is not one of those vulnerabilities that can be exploited through the preview pane, but it does have some potential countermeasures. So if you are using the Microsoft recommended block macros from running in Office files from the internet, you're protected, you're good. Also, if you're using the VBA macro notification settings, you're good as well. So as long as you've got those notifications enforced, that's good. But a lot of people are using macros and sending files to each other. And the reason I picked this as well, based on all of those factors, considering that when I did a Google search for Microsoft project template ideas, there was a huge number of templates that I could download, and a lot of them were for free. That is exactly where one of these payloads would be placed. So you can either email, so in an email-based attack, just send that project file and open it up to be exploited, but you can also do it through the website. So if you were looking for a project plan, a project template to help you with patching strategy, for example, and you downloaded that, that could actually have an issue inside of it. Now, this was one of the severities that were marked important with a CVSS score of 8.8. It is weaponized. Luckily, this is not public aware. It has quite a serious significant risk factor because it can be exploited across the network, and that means internet as well, with low complexity, no privileges required, but it does require the user to go ahead and open it up. I put a summary here in case you're justifying this within your project, within your change control, but I highly recommend if you're using Microsoft Project, it might not be as highly distributed across your environment as such as Office, for example, and Word and Outlook, but do please include that. Very, very important. My second one is 2024-38178. This is a scripting engine memory corruption vulnerability. Now, this vulnerability involves memory corruption in the scripting engine, specifically impacting the Microsoft Edge browser I mentioned earlier. So if you do not install Edge, which is now an application on your PC, if you have a legacy Windows device, it may come as standard. But if you're not installing Microsoft Edge, you're okay. If you are using Microsoft Edge, and it is a very, very popular browser, it's very, very serious that you include this one in your rollout. So for an attacker to exploit the vulnerability, it requires user interaction. An authenticated user must click on a malicious link. I've just mentioned a couple of examples. Once clicked, though, they can initiate remote code execution, which is the most serious type of vulnerability. That's the ransomware attack. Now, despite the necessity for that user to initiate that, it's still considerable risk. It can attack over any network, including the internet, with high attack complexity, no privileges. It does require user interaction, and it does have a jump point. And lastly, the Windows Line Printer Daemon, LPD service remote code execution vulnerability. Now, this particular vulnerability is critical. It was, but not marked by the vendor as such. They actually mark the vendor severity as just important, but it carries a CVSS of 9.9. It is one of the public aware vulnerabilities. Now, I mentioned that this one is very, very serious. You may not actually be using remote printing on your environments. Everyone's going to like PDF, etc. But due to the nature of the vulnerability and no user interaction required or elevation of privileges required, is highly exploitable if you are using a printer daemon in your organization. So if you don't have printer daemons, there is a countermeasure. You don't necessarily have to remediate that. However, it does also have an attack vector of network, which includes the internet with low attack complexity, no privileges, no user interaction, and it does not have a jump point. Now, what I've done down here in this table, we've got all of the CVEs that were fixed from Microsoft in order of priority of the 6 score that we talked about, those 6 factors. Take the CVE from here, pop it into your tool set. So even if you're not a Syxsense customer, go and pop this into your tool set. See which of these have the highest exposure in your organization and put those into the first deployments. And if you can take a number of these before you saturate your network, please start using, say, 3 or 4 of these, roll those out, then add the next ones in, add the next ones in. In the additional information section here, you'll find a lot of updates with additional information, such as what could happen if they could exploit this. This mark of the web is a very serious one for me because we've seen it exploited already this year. It is now all weaponized again. And the mark of the web is if you could remove that sort of flag, then sending files from the internet to a PC doesn't enable the PC to detect that came from an unfriendly source and potentially allow you to open up something you're not supposed to, such as pictures or programs or PDFs from other users. Now, we've also got a few vulnerabilities down here. I just wanted to mention that have the jump point. So if you take this list, come down to here, whenever you see scope is changed or jump point is true, do pay attention specifically to that vulnerability. That is a vulnerability that can allow, if exploited through one technology, to move into another. Lastly, I mentioned at the front of this call, if you want to also join us on another one of our webinars, this is specifically about Patch Tuesday, but we do have Ask the Expert coming later on this month on the 21st of August. This is one of my colleagues who's going to take you through ideas to really help improve your security posture, how to deal with zero-day vulnerabilities, how to deploy remediations with our playbook technology, how to design your patching updates the way that I've maybe mentioned today. You might like that. do let us know. If you'd like to join us, I'd love you to save your seat on that, and we'll send you details on how you can join. And if you just want to know how Syxsense works and maybe have a demo, go ahead and use the button in the corner there. Thank you very much for joining me today. I hope this has been really useful. And until next time, when I see you in September, happy patching.